The moon was dying, and so was she. Commander Vescothran had stopped counting the days since she'd made peace with that fact. But her suit's chronometer hadn't stopped counting for her. 412 hours since the crash. 61 hours of breathable air left in the reserve tank. If she didn't move much. She had stopped moving much. She sat with her back against a slab of her own ship, in a crater that had been carved by the ship's own dying weight, and she watched the sky for lights that would not come. Above her, the debris field of the Third Fleet of the HFY Ascendancy turned slowly against the stars, a graveyard in high orbit, each fragment catching sunlight in a way that made it look, from below, almost peaceful. It had not been peaceful. She had watched 11,000 of her people die in 9 minutes, and she had watched it happen from the command chair of a ship that no longer had a working chair to sit in. She did not know who had done it. That was the part that kept her awake in the long, cold nights when sleep should have been a mercy. Some enemy fleet had appeared out of nowhere, hit the Third Fleet from 3 angles at once, and vanished before Vessa's sensors had even finished identifying the threat class. No hailing, no demands, no flag, just annihilation, precise and silent, and then empty space where a fleet used to be. Her own escape pod had taken her here, to this moon, because here was the only rock within range with enough gravity to catch her and enough atmosphere to keep her breathing for a while. She had transmitted a distress beacon on every frequency she knew, including several she wasn't supposed to know, for the first 6 days. On the 7th day, she had stopped because broadcasting a beacon only mattered if someone was listening, and the silence that answered her told her, more clearly than words could have, that no one was. The HFY Ascendancy did not send rescue missions for commanders who had lost their fleets. It sent inquiries eventually, and then it sent replacements. She was thinking about this, about the particular kind of loneliness that comes from being abandoned by people who are still, technically, alive when her suit's comm crackled. Shouldn't have. The comm had been dead air for 390 hours. She had checked it so many times that she'd worn a groove into the habit, the way a tongue returns to a broken tooth. She checked it again now, certain it was a glitch, and found a signal. Not her people's encoding. Not anything she recognized at all. A long, patient string of data repeating, addressed to nothing in particular and to her specifically all at once. She almost didn't answer it. In 400 hours of silence, she had built herself a version of dying that she could live with, quiet, private, unwitnessed. Whatever this was threatened to take that away from her, and some small, tired part of her resented it for that. But she was a commander, even a defeated one, and a commander does not ignore a signal. She opened the channel. 3 light-years away, aboard a scavenger vessel that was, by any reasonable measure, a piece of junk, a technician named Priya Okonkwo was eating cold noodles out of a container with her feet up on a console that had been rewired so many times it looked like a bird's nest, when the console screamed at her. "That's not a screaming kind of alert," said Des, from the pilot's seat, without turning around. Des was 26 and had joined the crew of the Second Chance 18 months ago because it was cheaper than a real education and, he'd said at the time, probably more useful. "What is that?" "It's a beacon," Priya said, sitting up so fast her noodles went sideways. "It's an old-format distress beacon. It's hang on. Old like broken? Or old like from before you were born? Old like the encoding is from a protocol we haven't used in 11 years, which means either somebody's still running very outdated gear or," she trailed off reading, "or it's not one of ours." That got Tomas's attention. Tomas Reyes was 63, had captained the Second Chance for the last 19 of those years, and had a face that had been weathered into an expression of permanent, unbothered calm by decades of finding other people's wreckage in the dark and hauling it home for scrap. He came up from the aft compartment wiping engine grease off his hands. "Not one of ours meaning what?" he said. "Meaning the beacon signature doesn't match any registered human vessel, colony, or station within transmission range," Priya said. "Meaning I think we just picked up somebody else's distress call. Somebody who isn't us." The bridge went quiet in the particular way it does when 3 people are all doing the same math at the same time and none of them like the answer they're getting. "How old is the signal?" Tomas said. Priya checked. Her stomach dropped a little. "It's been broadcasting for 400 hours. Continuously until about 6 days ago. Then it stopped." She looked up. Somebody sent this a long time before we picked it up. It's been drifting. We only caught it because we're sitting right in its path. And now it stopped, Des said. The distress signal stopped. There's a secondary channel still active. Low power. Automated, probably. A beacon that switched to standby mode to save fuel. Priya's hands were already moving across the console, plotting. Whoever sent this might still be alive. Or the equipment might just still be running after they're not. I can't tell from here. Tomas didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the star chart Priya had pulled up, at the little blinking marker sitting on a moon nobody had ever bothered to name. 3 days hard burn from their current position, well outside any shipping lane, well outside anywhere the second chance had business being. That's compact space, Des said quietly. Or near enough. We go poking around out there, we're not exactly covered by anybody's treaty. I know where it is, Tomas said. So we're not going. Tomas looked at him. Then he looked at Priya, who had stopped eating her noodles entirely and was watching him with an expression he recognized, because he'd taught her most of what she knew and some habits transfer whether you mean them to or not. Somebody's out there, Tomas said. For 100 hours and nobody came. You want to be the ones who also didn't come. Nobody answered that because it wasn't really a question. Set the course, Tomas said, and went back to wiping his hands, as if the decision had cost him nothing at all, though later Priya would remember the particular stillness in his shoulders and understand that it had cost him plenty. He simply didn't believe in showing it. Ves-Cothran spent the better part of a day convinced that the signal was a trap. It made more sense than the alternative. The compact had enemies who would very much like to locate a stranded KRYL fleet commander and either interrogate her or make an example of her, and a fake rescue beacon was exactly the kind of patient, low-cost trick a patient, low-cost enemy would run. She ran the encoding through every analysis routine her suit still had power for and found nothing that told her who was on the other end, which told her nothing because a good trap doesn't announce itself. Still, she answered when the response came in. It arrived 2 days later, an actual voice this time, badly accented, running through a translation matrix that kept stumbling over KRYL grammar like a person walking on unfamiliar ice. Asterisk, this is the Independent Salvage Vessel Second Chance. Responding to your distress beacon. Please confirm you are receiving. We are 3 days out. Please confirm status. Asterisk. Ves sat with that for a long time before she answered. Identify your affiliation, she sent back, her own translator working the words the other direction. We're not affiliated with anybody who'd be shooting at you, came the reply, after a pause long enough that she suspected the humans on the other end were arguing about how to phrase it. Asterisk, we're independent. Human registry. We picked up your beacon by accident and we're coming to get you. That's the whole story. Asterisk. Humans, Ves said, mostly to herself, though the channel was open and it went through. She knew the word. Everyone in KRYL space knew the word, the way everyone knows the name of a storm that hasn't reached them yet but is on the charts, moving. Humanity was young, according to the reports she'd read, and undersized, and stubborn in a way that KRYL military doctrine had filed under inefficient rather than dangerous, though the doctrine had been wrong about worse things. She did not know what a salvage vessel full of independent humans wanted with a defeated enemy officer. She could not think of a version of the answer that didn't end badly for her. Asterisk, you still there? Asterisk, the voice said. Asterisk, look. I get that this is strange. I would be suspicious too. But you've got, by our read of your equipment, maybe 2 days of air left and we're the only ship coming. So it's really just a question of whether you'd rather take the chance or not. Asterisk. It was, Ves reflected, an infuriatingly reasonable thing to say. I will take the chance, she said. I do not, however, trust you. Fair? The voice said, and there was something in the badly translated tone that might, if she were being generous, have been amusement. Asterisk. We'll try to earn it on the way. Asterisk. The second chance came down through the moon's thin atmosphere on the 3rd day, and Ves watched it land from the mouth of her crater with her hand resting, out of 19 years of trained instinct, on a sidearm that had exactly 4 charges left in it. The ship was ugly. That was her first unguarded thought, and it startled a short, humorless laugh out of her. The first sound she'd made that wasn't a status report to her own equipment in nearly 3 weeks. It was patched in 6 visibly different metals, its hull plaiting a mismatched quilt of scavenged parts, and it settled onto the regolith with a grinding shudder that did not inspire confidence in its structural integrity. It looked, she thought, like something that had been rescued itself, more than once, and had simply kept flying out of stubbornness. The airlock cycled. 3 humans came down the ramp. She had seen images of humans in briefing files, flattened and clinical, notes on musculature and estimated bite force and thermal tolerance. None of it had prepared her for how small they seemed against the black sky, how soft their movements were, how little armor they wore. The oldest one, silver-haired, unhurried, raised both hands as he approached, palms out, a gesture she recognized from a dozen species as "I am not about to attack you," and stopped a careful distance away. "Commander," he said, through a translator box clipped to his collar. "I'm Tomas. That's Des, that's Priya. We're going to get you somewhere warmer. That all right with you?" Vess did not lower her hand from the sidearm. "Why?" Tomas considered the question with the same unhurried patience he seemed to bring to everything. "Because you sent a call for help and it took 400 hours for anybody to hear it, and that's a long time to wait for somebody to decide you're worth saving." He shrugged, a gesture so casual it seemed almost disrespectful to the gravity of the moment, though she would later understand it wasn't disrespect at all. It was simply that, to him, the answer really was that simple. "We heard it. So here we are. I am an officer of the KRYL Ascendancy," she said. "You understand what that means. Means you lost a fleet and your own people didn't come get you," Des said, not unkindly, from a few steps back. "We looked up what we could on the way. Figured you'd want to know we're not confused about who you are." That, more than the gesture with the hands, was the thing that unsettled her. They knew what she was. They had chosen to come anyway. "I don't understand your objective," Vess said. And it was, she realized with some discomfort, the truest thing she'd said in weeks. "There isn't one," Priya said. She was younger than the other 2, and she said it plainly, the way you'd correct a simple factual error. "You were stranded. We had a working ship. That's the whole equation. I know that's not how you'd expect this to go. It's genuinely not that complicated for us." Vess looked at the 3 of them for a long moment, at their unarmored bodies, their unhurried hands, their ridiculous patched-together ship sitting behind them like a proof of concept for exactly the kind of institutional carelessness her own doctrine would have predicted from a species this young. And then, because the alternative was to die alone in a crater out of pure principle, and because some tired, unmilitary part of her recognized that principle was a poor substitute for air, she lowered her hand from the sidearm and let them help her stand. The interior of the Second Chance was warmer than her suit readouts, and smelled like engine coolant and something Priya called coffee, and it took Vess most of the first hour aboard to stop flinching every time one of the humans moved suddenly near her. Old training. Old wounds. She sat wrapped in a thermal blanket that was, absurdly, patterned with small cartoon animals, and drank something hot and bitter that Des insisted would help, and waited for the trap to reveal itself. It didn't, not on the first day or the second. What revealed itself instead, slowly, over the 3 days it would take the ship to limp back toward human-controlled space, was something closer to a routine. Tomas ran diagnostics and told bad jokes to no one in particular. Priya, once she'd confirmed Vess wasn't going to attempt anything hostile, treated her less like a rescued enemy commander and more like an interesting engineering problem, asking blunt questions about KRYL ship design that Vess found herself answering before she'd decided to. Des, it turned out, was terrified of her and covered it by talking constantly, which Vess found, against every expectation she'd walked aboard with, mildly endearing. On the second day, she asked the question she'd been sitting on since the crater. "Your salvage license," she said, over the ship's evening meal, which she was still deciding whether she could digest. "Does it cover retrieving stranded enemy officers? Or are you doing this without authorization from your government?" Tomas laughed. A short, surprised bark of a sound. "Commander, nobody authorized this. We're not military. We're not diplomats. We're 3 people who fix ships for a living and happen to be in range." "Then you have taken a significant personal risk," Vess said slowly, "for no institutional benefit." "Yep," Des said, around a mouthful of something Vess had declined to try. "That is not a rational allocation of resources." "Probably not," Tomas agreed, entirely unbothered. We do it anyway. Turns out that's most of what being human comes down to if you ask around enough. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd come aboard, his easy expression had something more serious underneath it. You'd have done the same once. Before, whatever taught you not to. Vess did not have an answer for that. She had been a cadet once who believed, with the uncomplicated certainty of the young, that strength meant never needing anyone. It had taken a war and a fleet's worth of graves to teach her the doctrine that replaced it, the one that said mercy was a resource, like fuel, to be spent only where it purchased advantage. She had spent 19 years being very good at that doctrine. It had not, in the end, saved her fleet or come to save her. She said nothing, and Tomas, to his credit, did not push. He only added quietly, almost as an afterthought, "Somebody hauled me out of a wreck once, back when I was younger than Des. Freighter accident, out past the belt. I didn't know them, they didn't know me anything, and it cost them 2 days they didn't have to spend. I asked the pilot afterward why she'd bothered." He turned his mug slowly in his hands, watching the steam rise off it. "She said the whole point of getting rescued is that eventually you're the one doing the rescuing. Been trying to hold up my end of that ever since." Vess turned the words over the way she turned over unfamiliar terrain, looking for the trap in them, and found, uncomfortably, that there wasn't one. It was not a doctrine. It was not even really a philosophy, in the structured sense the ascendancy trained into its officers. It was closer to a debt passed hand to hand across strangers who would never meet each other, and somehow that made it sturdier than anything she had been taught, not weaker. "That is not a strategy," she said. "It has no enforcement mechanism. Nothing obligates the next person to pay it forward." "Nope," Tomas agreed. "Works anyway, more often than you'd think." The trouble found them on the third day, which was, Vess reflected later, exactly when trouble tended to find people who had allowed themselves to relax. It was Priya who saw it first, a return on the long-range scanner that made her sit up so fast her chair rolled backward. "We've got a contact. Big one. Coming in fast on an intercept vector." She pulled up the signature, and her face went carefully, professionally blank in a way that Vess had already learned meant she was frightened and didn't want to say so. "Care whale configuration," Vess said, reading over her shoulder. Her stomach tightened. "That's a compact recovery cutter. Search and salvage class, but armed for boarding actions." She knew the silhouette the way she knew her own hands. "They will have picked up the same debris field trace we launched from. They are looking for survivors of the Third Fleet." "Is that good news or bad news?" Des asked, already strapping into the pilot's seat beside her. "Both," Vess said grimly. "If they find me, I am no longer their commander. I am a captured asset or a liability to be eliminated, depending on which faction currently controls that cutter's chain of command. Given what I know of my fleet's destruction, I would not wager on the former." "They'll eliminate you," Tomas said, working it through, "because you're the only witness to whatever actually happened to the Third Fleet." "That is my assessment, yes. And us." Vess considered lying and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she didn't want to. "You are an unarmed salvage vessel harboring a KRYL officer inside compact adjacent space without clearance. They will not need much justification." The bridge was quiet for exactly as long as it took Tomas to make a decision, which was not very long at all. "Options," he said to Priya. "We can't outrun a cutter. Our engines are held together with hope and duct tape. We can't outfight it, we don't have weapons that would scratch its paint." Priya was already working the problem, hands flying. "But we might be able to confuse it. Their scan is going to read our hull signature. It's a mess, it's scavenged parts from 4 different manufacturers, it barely reads as a coherent ship at all. If we kill main power and drift, we might read as debris. We're sitting near the edge of an old shipping lane full of actual wreckage. We could hide in the noise." "Might," Tomas said. "Might," Priya agreed. "And if it doesn't work? Then they board us and we find out how good Commander Cothran's negotiating skills are." Vess looked at the two of them, at Des's white-knuckled grip on a control yoke he had, until 3 minutes ago, only ever used to navigate around drifting scrap, at Priya's fast, precise hands running calculations that could get all three of them killed, at Tomas's face, which had lost none of its calm even now, and she understood, with a clarity that embarrassed her, that none of them were going to hand her over. It had not even come up as an option. Not once, not in the tone of the conversation, not in the shape of the plan they were building. They had simply assumed, without discussing it, that keeping her alive was the objective and built everything else around that. 19 years of doctrine had a name for that kind of behavior. It called it a weakness to be exploited. Sitting in the middle of it, watching it happen, Vess found she couldn't remember why she'd ever believed that. She thought of the crater, and the 61 hours of air she'd had left when the first signal reached her, and the 400 hours before that when no one had come. She thought of how easily this could end the same way, except this time with 3 people paying for her survival with their own. "There is a third option," she said abruptly. They looked at her. "Give me a channel to the cutter. Let me hail them directly, before they scan you at all." "That's the worst plan I've heard today," Des said. "And today's had some strong contenders." "I do not intend to surrender," Vess said. "I intend to lie to them extensively, in a dialect of military bureaucracy that took me 19 years to learn and that none of you could fake in 19 minutes. Cut your main power exactly as Priya suggested. Let me do the rest." Tomas studied her for a moment, the kind of look, she would understand only later, that he gave to problems he decided to trust to someone else's hands, and then he nodded to Priya. "Kill the power. Commander, you're on." The channel opened with the harsh, clipped formality. Vess had spent a career learning to project and had almost forgotten she still owned. "Compact cutter, this is Fleet Auditor Designation 719, currently embedded on independent contract tracking debris dispersal from the 3rd Fleet engagement," she said. Before the cutter's officer had finished their own opening hail, a small, deliberate act of dominance she'd learned from commanders twice her rank. "You are interfering with an active forensic recovery. State your authorization." There was a pause on the other end, the particular pause of a junior officer suddenly unsure whether they'd stumbled into someone else's chain of command. "We have no record of an auditor assignment to this sector," the cutter's officer said. "Less certain now. Because it is 3 days old and your update cycle is, by regulation, 5, Vess said, letting a thin thread of contempt into her voice, the exact register a tired senior officer used on a subordinate who was wasting her time. "I am cataloging wreckage signatures to establish cause of engagement for the tribunal review. Every hour you spend interrupting that process is an hour you will need to explain in writing. Do you wish to explain it in writing?" Another pause, longer this time. "No, Auditor," the officer said. "Apologies for the interruption. We will resume search pattern." "See that you do," Vess said, and closed the channel with the crisp, unceremonious click of someone who had never doubted, for 1 second, that she would be obeyed. The bridge of the second chance stayed silent until the cutter's signature finally curved away on the long-range scan and dwindled into the dark. "Fleet Auditor 719, Des said eventually, in a voice that wasn't entirely steady. "There is no such designation," Vess said. "I made it up. Bureaucracies this large do not know all of their own titles, and officers are trained never to admit that they don't." She found, to her own surprise, that her hands were shaking slightly, now that it was over. "It has been a very long time since I used that particular skill for something other than losing." Priya let out a breath that turned, halfway through, into a startled laugh. "You just out-bureaucrated an entire war fleet." "I believe I did, yes." Tomas was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not surprise, exactly, but something like recognition, as if a piece of a puzzle he'd been holding had finally turned the right way round. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "You could have let them board, told them we forced you aboard, probably walked away clean. Instead you spent your last good trick keeping us out of it too." Vess considered the question seriously because it deserved a serious answer, and because she found she wanted to give him one. "You did not have to come for me," she said. "You had no fleet ordering it, no treaty requiring it, no benefit waiting for you at the end of it. You came anyway, because leaving me did not occur to you as an option." She paused, choosing the words with the same care she'd once reserved for battle reports. "I find I would like to learn how that works." Lying for you seemed a reasonable place to begin. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Des, breaking the silence in the way Vess had already learned was simply how he processed things too large to sit with quietly, said, "Okay, officially, best rescue we've ever done." And the tension on the bridge broke into something that was almost unbelievably laughter. They reached the outer edge of human space 4 days later, past a checkpoint station that logged the second chance S arrival with the bored efficiency of people who had seen stranger things come through than a KRYL fleet commander riding in a scavenger's hold. Vess stood at the viewport as the station's lights spread out below them. More of them than she had expected, warm and unplanned and scattered without any of the geometric discipline the Ascendancy's own colonies were built with, and she found she couldn't stop looking at them. "It's not much," Tomas said, coming to stand beside her. "Compared to what you're used to. It is considerably more than I expected to see again," Vess said. Behind her, Priya was already on comms, working through the tangled, patient process of explaining to a bewildered port authority exactly what her ship had brought home, and Des was drafting, with visible relish, what he insisted on calling the salvage report. 1-1, Carawale Fleet Commander, condition, alive value, unknown, recommend keeping. Vess did not know yet what would happen to her here. She did not know if the species would decide, once the strangeness of the rescue wore off, that a defeated enemy officer was a prisoner, or a liability, or a curiosity to be studied and discarded. She had spent 19 years learning that mercy was a currency spent only for advantage, and she had no framework yet for a species that seemed to spend it on strangers for no reason at all, simply because the alternative was letting someone die who didn't have to. There would be questions waiting for her past that checkpoint, officials who would want to know what she'd seen of the Third Fleet's destruction, analysts who would want to pick apart everything she knew about Ascendancy doctrine, and somewhere down the line, a decision about what a rescued enemy commander was even permitted to become in a society that had no category ready-made for her. She understood that the debt Tomas had described did not erase any of it. It only meant she would face those questions from inside a ship's hold instead of a crater, breathing air someone else had chosen to share with her for no better reason than that she'd needed it. For the first time in 412 hours, that felt like enough. She only knew that 412 hours ago, she had been sitting in a crater on a dying moon, making peace with an ending nobody was coming to interrupt. And somebody had come anyway. "What happens now?" she asked, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the question didn't feel like a countdown, felt like a door. Tomas looked out at the scattered, undisciplined lights of the station, and shrugged, the same easy gesture he'd used in the crater. The one she now understood wasn't carelessness at all, but a kind of faith so ordinary to him that he'd stopped noticing he had it. "Now," he said, "we figure it out. Together, if you're in." Vess Cothran, who had commanded 11,000 souls and lost every one of them, who had been abandoned by an empire built on the doctrine that the weak deserve what happens to them, looked at the lights of a species that had crossed 3 days of hostile space for no reason but that someone was drowning and they were close enough to pull her out. "I am in," she said. It was the truest thing she had said since the crash.